Hello and a very warm welcome to a brand new edition of World Panorama with me, Frank Periera, on Rajya Sabha television. Over the next half an hour, we'll bring you a roundup of all the significant events to have happened around the world this week. But first, a look at the headlines. India and Afghanistan issue stern message to Pakistan. Both countries call for an end to state-sponsored terrorism. India commits $1 billion for development in Afghanistan. Eerie calm settles across Syria as fragile truce holds. Moscow and Washington agree to extend ceasefire. Sides fall silent after years of war. Children finally seen playing on the streets. United States signs an unprecedented pact with Israel worth $38 billion over the next 10 years. Prime Minister Netanyahu thanks President Obama after the MOU is signed. And US warns North Korea of serious consequences over fears of another nuclear test. Flies two B-1B Lancer strategic bombers over South Korea. Bombers conduct low-altitude flight over airbase. Well, let's begin with our top focus this week. India has offered a grant of $1 billion to Afghanistan on Wednesday towards the development of the war-torn country. In a bilateral meeting between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Afghan President Ashraf Ghani at Hyderabad House in New Delhi, both countries also agreed for greater cooperation in defence and trade.
In a stern message to Pakistan, India and Afghanistan called for an end to all support, sponsorship and safe havens to terrorists. Holding extensive talks in the capital on Wednesday, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and visiting Afghan President Ashraf Ghani expressed their resolve to counter terrorism and strengthen security and defence cooperation in the region as per the India-Afghanistan Strategic Partnership Agreement.
Two leaders discussed the regional situation and expressed grave concern at the continued use of terrorism and violence in the region for achieving political objectives. They agreed that this phenomenon presented the single biggest threat to peace, stability and progress in the region and beyond. And they called for elimination of all forms of terrorism.
They do not behave like malign non-state actors vis-à-vis their neighbors. They see a collective security to be the objective, and that's what brings stability. Stability does not come from the barrel of the gun.
Reiterating India's abiding support for a democratic, peaceful and prosperous Afghanistan, India also promised aid of $1 billion for Afghanistan's capacity and capability building in education, health, agriculture, empowerment of women and energy. Emphasizing on the need for Indian business chambers to contribute towards Afghanistan, President Ghani said two-way trade between both countries should reach $10 billion in the next 5 years with enhanced air connectivity.
Let's start with a target of 10 billions in trade and investment. 5 years, and we are going to realize it. What unites us, and I echo the words of the minister, is our democratic values, our commitment to peace, our commitment to a world secure for children, secure for women, a world where opportunities can be created for the poor.
Ghani arrived on Wednesday on his second visit to India in less than 2 years. Both sides also signed 3 agreements including the extradition treaty, cooperation in civil and commercial matters, and the Memorandum of Understanding on Cooperation in Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. Akhilesh Suman's report for Rajya Sabha TV.
Well, joining me for a chat this week to talk about this is Ambassador Shashank, former Foreign Secretary. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining me on the program. You know, this is not the first time that Ghani has visited India as President of Afghanistan. He was here last year as well. But if you look at the two visits, last year and this year, there's a stark contrast between the two.
Well, one reason could be Afghanistan's experience of dealing with the advice given by the United States to befriend Pakistan. and Pakistan-sponsored negotiations with good Taliban had been going on. Afghanistan took part in that. Gradually they realized that there was no difference between good Taliban and bad Taliban, and Pakistan was doing no good to any one of the neighbors. And they also found that Pakistani was supporting and sponsoring many of these terrorist activities in Afghanistan. So I must say that the intelligence cooperation which was supposed to have taken place between Afghanistan and Pakistan really turned sour. Young defense officers who were getting trained in Kakul Academy, they also must have seen that Pakistani officers really don't have any friendly sentiments towards Afghanistan. I think this is one change. Second change, of course, we find that Pakistan is getting all-out support from China, which is flexing its muscles in Asia. On South China Sea on one hand, on this side they are now moving more aggressively into Kashmir, into Baltistan, Gilgit, in Balochistan. And only now lately we are realizing that Pakistan is putting 2 soldiers for each Chinese working in Balochistan. So with this kind of a scenario happening in Pakistan, and Pakistan trying to destabilize its neighbors like Afghanistan, Bangladesh, India, and terrorism spreading all over the world, I think Afghanistan has come to realize, and I hope that Americans have also realized this and advised Afghanistan that they should find other friends. So therefore the strategic partnership which was negotiated as the first strategic partnership between Afghanistan and any other country with India, I think now is being perhaps put into place, not so much for defense weapons to be supplied by India, because I'm quite sure that Afghanistan has enough recourse to defense weaponry and training, etc. from its Western friends. I think it's a question of providing a bulwark of democratic and peaceful support from the people of India, and so build up once again friendship between the Afghan and Indian people. We have already spent more than $1 billion on various activities, including the formation of hospitals, parliament building there, road construction. Then I think our Prime Minister and Abdul Ghani, they were together in Shabahar when the Shabahar port project was signed with the Iranian leadership. So I think Afghanistan has been asking Pakistan to give the direct route between Afghanistan and India as members of SAARC, because there are connectivity agreements in SAARC.
Indeed.
But Pakistan wants to hold the SAARC summit, but does not want to give any of the special features which should be part of connectivity among the SAARC countries.
Indeed. You know, you spoke about Iran, and do we see that in the near future, a trilateral maybe between India, Iran and Afghanistan cornering Pakistan?
Well, at one time it was being talked about. At that stage, Iran was saying that on Afghanistan also that perhaps it should be a quadrilateral, including Pakistan. But I think first of all, perhaps we should have a trilateral with US, India and Afghanistan, so that we know what we are trying to achieve in Asia and South Asia in general, because US still remains the most important player in the region. Then we'll have to see if Iran can be brought into it, because not all the sanctions have been removed from Iran.
Indeed.
And Iran is really chafing under those sanctions, even blaming India for going slow on the infrastructure projects that we have promised to Iran. We are doing our very best. We have had this problem in Myanmar, where we had to go slow.
Yes.
And it is Aung San Suu Kyi who recently went to the White House, asked the Americans to remove the sanctions from Burma. So I think this is the problem, that Americans, once they impose sanctions, they find it extremely difficult to work with their Congress to lift those sanctions. So we should all work together and see whether the Americans are able to move in this election year and get a consensus of the Democrats and Republicans that now they should look at Asia not from the Chinese eyes, that is G2 which they are thinking of, not from the eye of the European powers which had divided India and Pakistan at one time, but they should really try to see their partners. They are talking of defining partnership with India for this century. So can they look into the viewpoints and the interests that India is trying to project to them?
Indeed.
And they are not Indian interests, they are also interests for the other countries in Asia.
Let's come back to Afghanistan now and talk about the 3 main takeaways. What would you list out as the 3 main takeaways from Ghani's visit to India?
No, above everything else, India has committed $1 billion for the socio-economic projects and for infrastructure within Afghanistan, which is extremely important because India has concentrated right from the beginning, even when we were being discouraged from any other activity. So we were saying, all right, we will do for children, for women, for the ordinary Afghan people. And there is a lot of destruction which has taken place there. India can help them quite a bit in that. That is number one. Secondly, India's attitude seems to have changed now with what Pakistan is doing. So we want to cooperate with other countries in the region on counter-terrorism very strongly. So let us see how we can work on that. Third, we are finding that, yes, on defense cooperation, while we are not supplying any weapons systems, but I think we have supplied one helicopter to them. And for training purposes, I think Indian institutions are considered to be some of the best institutions. So if we can do that and backup support and computerization also for their security-related infrastructure. And I think this thing which you have talked about the outer space cooperation, India has offered it to all the SAARC countries.
Yes.
Some of them are not willing to accept it, so at least Afghanistan is willing to do it. I'm quite sure that Afghanistan will benefit a great deal with this cooperation.
Indeed. All right, we'll have to leave it at that, Ambassador. Thank you so much for joining us on the program and putting things into perspective for us.
Thank you.
Well, moving on, now the United States will give Israel $38 billion in military aid over a decade, the largest such aid package in US history, under an agreement disclosed this week and signed on Wednesday. The agreement was signed at the State Department by US Undersecretary of State Thomas Shannon and by Jacob Nagel, acting head of Netanyahu's National Security Council. Here's a detailed report. The United States on Wednesday signed an unprecedented new security agreement with Israel that will give the Israeli military $38 billion over 10 years. The deal, the largest such agreement the US has ever had with any country, amounts to $3.8 billion a year beginning in budget year 2019, compared with $3.1 billion the US gave Israel annually under the current 10-year deal that expires in 2018.
This is the single largest pledge of military assistance to any country in U.S. history. At a time when we're tightening our belts across the board, with the harmful sequestration spending cuts set to return in just a couple years, this MOU nonetheless greatly increases our military assistance commitment to Israel.
After months of negotiations that took place after a particularly tense time in the relationship amid disputes over the Iran nuclear deal, the MOU was signed at the State Department by Israel's National Security Advisor Jacob Nagel and Thomas Shannon, the third highest ranking US diplomat. The deal will allow Israel to upgrade most of its fighter aircraft, improve its ground forces' mobility, and strengthen its missile defense systems.
This unprecedented assistance will also cover a robust missile defense funding through the next decade for the first time, and will help us effectively plan and develop multi-layer missile defense systems to counter the growing missile threats in our region.
After the deal was signed, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu thanked the United States President and Congress for what he called a historic defense aid package.
I would like to thank President Obama and his administration for his historical deal. I will also thank our army. I'll also thank our many friends in the American Congress and the American people for their bipartisan support from the United States.
While the package constitutes the most US military aid ever given to any country, it entails concessions by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Those include Israel's promise not to seek additional funds from Congress beyond what will be guaranteed annually in the new package, and to phase out a special arrangement that has allowed Israel to spend part of its US aid on its own defense industry instead of on American-made weapons. The $38 billion Memorandum of Understanding covers US fiscal years 2019 to 2028 and succeeds the current $30 billion MOU signed in 2007, which expires at the end of fiscal 2018. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha Television. Well, it's time for a short break now, but still to come. A rare sense of calm descends upon Syria. Fragile truce facilitated by US and Russia holds children seen playing on the streets again, albeit just temporarily. That and much more still to come. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome Welcome back. You're watching Rajya Sabha Television. Well, a sense of eerie calm descended upon several parts of Syria on Monday after a nationwide ceasefire brokered by the United States and Russia came into effect. The first few days saw relative calm despite some incidents of sporadic violence. Children were seen playing on the streets for the first time in many years. Meanwhile, at least 23 people, including 9 children, were killed during airstrikes on Thursday as the United States and Russia accused each other of violating a fragile ceasefire. However, the town targeted in the raids, Al-Mariadan, is controlled by ISIS and the ceasefire does not apply to areas held by the group. Here's a detailed report.
A rare calm took over Syria on Tuesday as a nationwide ceasefire brokered by the United States and Russia came into effect at sunset on Monday. On the first day, despite early ceasefire violations, major conflict zones across the country were quiet. No deaths were reported in the first 15 hours.
The earliest reports are that there's some reduction in violence, as well as a few reports of fighting here and there, though it is far too early to draw any definitive conclusions, and I am not drawing any definitive conclusions.
The cessation of hostilities coincided with the Muslim festival Eid ul-Zuha. The ceasefire created a relaxed mood among the residents, although prospects of peace have created a mixed response.
We are with the truce, but every time we have one, the militants do not commit to it. They attack us and do not commit to the agreements of the truce. We hope things get better and God makes the army victorious.
The Syrian army says it reserves the right to respond decisively to any violation by armed groups. The truce doesn't apply to the terrorist groups Islamic State and Jabhat Fateh al-Sham, formerly known as the Al-Nusra Front. Both Russia and the United States have also decided to establish a joint operations center to coordinate airstrikes on these groups.
To eliminate any possible doubts about how he will observe the agreement in the form it had been reached, we offer to publish this agreement. Everything that is written there is a subject of our agreement, and we have undertaken responsibility upon ourselves to observe it dutifully.
Just hours before the ceasefire started, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad gave a defined message to the country's opposition forces, saying all areas will be recovered from the rebels.
When we come to this area, we give a message that Syrian state is determined to recover every area from terrorists, re-establishing safety and security, rebuilding the infrastructure, rebuilding everything, whether the cost was humanitarian or material.
The UN, however, condemned Syrian government for its human rights abuses and said it needed further security assurances before it can send in aid convoys.
The government, which is responsible for some of the gravest violations on record in the history of this Council, has regularly sent note verbals to my office reporting abuses by armed groups. But it offers no possibility whatsoever for independent scrutiny.
A nationwide ceasefire has been attempted several times in Syria with limited success. The deal agreed on Friday by the US and Russia is another push at putting an end to the fighting after more than 5 years of war between forces loyal to President Bashar al-Assad and groups fighting to depose him. However, there are concerns about whether it will hold. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Meanwhile, in a show of force that escalated tensions in the Korean peninsula, the US flew 2 supersonic B-1B Lancer strategic bombers over South Korea. The 2 bombers conducted a low-altitude flight over an airbase in retaliation to North Korea conducting a nuclear test. The US has warned the North of serious consequences in light of the test. B-1B bombers are capable of carrying nuclear missiles and bombs that are able to destroy even underground bunkers. Here's more.
Two US supersonic B-1 Lancer strategic bombers flew over South Korea on Tuesday. The US action came just days after North Korea's 5th nuclear test last week. The bombers conducted a low-altitude flight over the Osan Air Base just 77 kilometers from the demilitarized zone border with North Korea. Capable of carrying the largest payload of both guided and unguided weapons among the US Air Force aircraft. The bombers were escorted by South Korean and US fighter jets.
This demonstration provides just one example of the full range of military capabilities available to this alliance. It is a deep arsenal, and it is a part of our efforts to strengthen and extend our extended deterrence.
On Monday, South Korea said that the North Korea was ready to conduct an additional nuclear test at any time.
As we have warned multiple times, if North Korea conducts a military provocation, they'll be met at a firm response from us that will shake the very foundation of the regime.
The US action prompted China's foreign ministry to ask all sides to avoid taking steps that will increase in the region.
I think China's position is very clear. In the present situation, we hope that all relevant parties can remain rational and exercise restraint and not provoke each other, causing regional tensions to keep rising. Because if there is a vicious cycle of tensions continuing to rise and mutual provocations, it will not be in anyone's interest.
Both China and Russia strongly opposed a recent decision by the United States and South Korea to deploy an advanced anti-missile system in the south to counter the North's missile threat. Both have also shown reluctance to back sanctions against the North. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Well, much else has unfolded around the world this week. Here's a roundup of the other international news of the week in Globe Watch.
A Karachi-bound express train collided with a stationary freight train in Pakistan's central Punjab region, killing at least 6 people and injuring more than 150. The accident occurred 25 kilometers from the city of Multan around 2:30 a.m. local time on Thursday, when the passenger train Awami Express crashed into a goods train which had stopped after running over a man crossing the railway track. Typhoon Meranti lashed Taiwan with its biggest storm in 21 years on Wednesday before striking mainland China, which issued a red alert for waves as the storm bore down. Violent winds of up to 370 kilometers per hour and torrential rain brought parts of eastern and southern Taiwan to a standstill. Hengchung's observation station recorded the strongest gust in its 120-year history. Meranti made landfall in China early Thursday in Fujian province with gusts of up to 280 kilometers per hour. The Chinese and Russian navies are staging 8 days of war games in the South China Sea in a sign of growing cooperation between their armed forces against the backdrop of regional territorial disputes. The Joint Sea 2016 maneuvers, which began on Monday, include ships, submarines, shipborne helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft, along with marines and amphibious armored vehicles that will conduct live firing exercises. Tasks will include defensive and rescue drills, anti-submarine exercises, and the simulated seizure of an enemy island by marines from both sides. The United States will lift the sanctions in place against Myanmar after nearly 20 years, a decision that clears one of the last remaining obstacles to fully normalize relations between the two countries. US President Barack Obama made the announcement on Wednesday after meeting in the Oval Office with the country's state councillor Aung San Suu Kyi. The decision by the White House ends nearly 3 decades of strained diplomatic relations with Myanmar. Hillary Clinton has released new information about her health as she recuperated from pneumonia, with her doctor stressing she remains healthy overall and fit to serve as president. Pressure had mounted for the campaign to release information about the Democratic White House nominee's medical status after she fell ill at a 9/11 memorial event on Sunday, and it was disclosed that she had pneumonia.
Well, let's now shift focus and bring you up to speed with all the sports news that you might have missed this week in sports action. The World Anti-Doping Agency has condemned Russian hackers for leaking confidential medical files of star US Olympic athletes. Athletes affected include tennis players Venus and Serena Williams and teenage gymnast Simone Biles. A group calling itself Fancy Bears claimed responsibility for the hack and said that the athletes were allowed to consume banned substances. The documents, however, do not reveal the diagnosis of the athletes, which led to WADA allowing them to take the substances. Russia has been stripped of 2 track and field medals from the 2008 Beijing Olympics after retests showed their athletes doped with an anabolic steroid. The International Olympic Committee said that 4 Russians have been disqualified from the Beijing Games in cases involving Chernobyl. Maria Abakumova, who won silver in the women's javelin, and Denis Alexeyev, who helped Russia's men's 4x400 meter relay team win bronze, have both been disqualified. The Court of Arbitration for Sport said it would deliver an appeal verdict on the 2-year doping ban for Maria Sharapova in early October. The 29-year-old Russian tested positive for the banned medication meldonium during January's Australian Open. In a severe blow to her reputation, the infringement was revealed in March. The original ruling had been expected by July 18th, with Sharapova hoping a successful appeal would allow her to spearhead the Russian tennis team in Rio. Lionel Messi scored his 6th Champions League hat-trick as rampant Barcelona inflicted on Celtic their heaviest ever European defeat. The Argentine forward cracked in an early first goal in the Group C match. Celtic's Moussa Dembele had a penalty saved before Messi poked in his second. In the second half, Neymar's free kick sailed into the net. Andreas Iniesta volleyed a 4th. Messi slid home the 5th and Suarez scored with a volley and then a side-footed finish. West Indies have announced Phil Simmons' departure as coach 5 months after their World T20 title triumph. The 53-year-old has endured a difficult time since leaving his post as the head coach of Ireland to lead West Indies. In September last year, he was suspended over his comments about team selection before being reinstated. The Windies board cited differences in culture and strategic approach as the reason for Simmons being sacked. He was informed about the termination of his contract on Tuesday by WICB CEO Michael Muirhead. And finally, the world's best forestry workers gathered in the picturesque Polish town of Wisla for the World Logging Championships. The championships, which have taken place every 2 years since 1970, pit the world's best handlers of a chainsaw from around the world against one another over 5 separate disciplines. Belarus dominated the 4 days of competition, winning the team event as well as claiming individual glory through Valery Jurowicz. I'm going to leave you with these visuals from Poland. See you again next time.